Have you ever wondered why nearly every culture on Earth, separated by oceans and thousands of years, somehow discovered the exact same strange habit, setting a plant on fire, then breathing in the smoke? It sounds almost too specific to be a coincidence. Different continents, different plants, different languages, and yet the same behavior appears again and again. So the real mystery isn't why people smoke today. It's why this urge exists at all, buried so deep in us that it shows up independently, over and over, across the entire span of human history. To find the beginning, we have to go back further than any cigarette, further than any pipe, further than agriculture itself. We have to go back to fire. Long before humans could write, before we had permanent shelters, before most of what we'd call civilization, our ancestors were already gathering around flame every single night. And here's the part most people never stop to consider. Fire doesn't just produce warmth and light. When wood, resin, and wild plants burn, they release chemical compounds into the air. Some of those compounds are completely inert. Others interact directly with the human nervous system. Early humans weren't choosing their campsites based on which plants happened to grow nearby. They were choosing based on shelter and water and safety, which means some nights, the fuel feeding their fire came from vegetation that released something their brains had never encountered before. Someone, at some unrecorded moment, breathed that smoke in and felt different. Lighter, strange, maybe unsettling. And their brain did something brains are extremely good at. It noticed. That single act of noticing, repeated across thousands of generations, may be one of the most quietly consequential moments in the story of our species. But smoke wasn't the only thing happening around those ancient fires. Something else, just as strange, was unfolding every night in the dark. Before controlled fire, our ancestors slept the way most primates still do, in short, fragmented bursts, always half alert, always vulnerable. Sleep was dangerous. You couldn't afford to go too deep when something with claws might be watching from the tree line. Then, fire changed the equation. With flames burning at the edge of camp, predators kept their distance. For the first time, a human body could lie flat on open ground and actually let go, and something in our biology responded. Modern humans sleep less than almost any other primate, but the quality of that sleep is dramatically different. We spend far more time in REM sleep, the deep phase tied to memory, emotion, and vivid dreaming. Here's why that matters. REM sleep is, neurologically speaking, an altered state. Certain regions of the brain quiet down. Others light up in patterns that don't occur while you're awake. Time distorts. Emotion intensifies. In other words, long before anyone inhaled a single breath of psychoactive smoke, fire had already given the human brain its first taste of altered consciousness, every single night, in the form of dreams. So when someone sat by that same fire, breathed in smoke that shifted their perception, and later woke from a vivid, emotionally overwhelming dream, those two experiences would have felt connected, not identical, but related. Both happened at the edge of firelight. Both left behind the unmistakable feeling that something significant had just occurred. But why would smoke affect the brain so specifically in the first place? The answer was already sitting inside every human skull. Your brain contains something called the endocannabinoid system. It regulates mood, memory, appetite, and stress. It is fundamental to how you function, and it existed long before anyone burned a single leaf. That system has receptors built to respond to certain compounds, and it turns out several wild plants growing across Africa, Asia, and Europe happen to produce compounds that fit those receptors almost perfectly. Not because those plants evolved to influence us, but because our own internal chemistry was already primed to notice them, which means the first time a human inhaled smoke from one of these plants, their brain wasn't confused. It recognized something, and whatever it recognized was memorable enough to seek out again. This isn't speculation dressed up for drama. It's a hypothesis taken seriously across archaeology, neuroscience, and pharmacology, because given where early humans lived, this kind of exposure wasn't unlikely. It was close to inevitable. The real question becomes, when did this shift from accident to intention? One of the clearest answers comes from a burial site high in a mountain range in Central Asia, dated to roughly 2,500 years ago. Archaeologists uncovered small wooden braziers, shallow dishes built to hold heated stones, alongside plant residue with unusually high concentrations of a specific psychoactive compound. This wasn't fiber used for rope or textiles. Someone had deliberately selected the more potent variety of the plant and placed it in a ritual burial, which means whoever did this understood exactly what they were choosing. For centuries, a Greek historian's account of a nearby culture doing something remarkably similar was dismissed as exaggeration. He described people building small enclosed tents, heating stones until they glowed, throwing plant matter onto them, and sitting inside the resulting smoke, apparently overcome with sensation. Historians assumed he was embellishing. Then archaeologists opened burial mounds belonging to that same culture and found exactly what he described: heated stones, bronze braziers, plant residue. He hadn't exaggerated at all. If anything, he'd underplayed it. Now here's the problem hiding inside all of this physical evidence. Organic material doesn't survive well. Wood, plant fiber, woven pouches, they break down within a few centuries under normal soil conditions. So when we say the oldest confirmed evidence is a few thousand years old, what we actually mean is that's the oldest evidence that happened to survive. The real origin of the practice is almost certainly far older, hidden in the gap between what happened and what we can still find. And that gap gets even stranger when we cross an ocean. In the deserts of what is now the western United States, archaeologists uncovered an ancient hearth containing seeds from a wild tobacco plant, deliberately clustered rather than scattered randomly, dated to roughly 12,000 years ago. No pipes, no pottery, just seeds, placed in fire over 10,000 years before recorded history begins anywhere on Earth. Which raises an unavoidable question. If people on one continent were doing this 12,000 years ago, what were people on every other continent doing with the psychoactive plants growing around them at the exact same time? When tobacco eventually reached the rest of the world after European contact, it arrived stripped of everything that had originally surrounded it. In the cultures where it originated, tobacco wasn't recreational. It was sacred. Smoke was understood as something that carried prayer upward and brought vision back down. A person using it wasn't relaxing. They were doing something considered serious, even dangerous in the way you'd treat anything genuinely powerful. Ancient medical traditions in Egypt, India, and elsewhere took a similar view, but through a different lens. Egyptian medical texts, nearly 3,500 years old, describe inhaling smoke from specific heated herbs to treat respiratory illness. Ancient Indian medicine describes a formalized practice, essentially smoke-based treatment refined over centuries with specific plants for specific conditions. To modern ears, that sounds unusual, but the logic holds up. If a compound has therapeutic value and the lungs are an efficient entry point into the bloodstream, smoke is direct delivery. We still use that exact principle today, just without the fire. But there's one more reason this behavior spreads so persistently, and it might be the oldest reason of all. Humans are intensely social animals, and shared ritual does something measurable to a group. It synchronizes behavior. It builds trust in ways that are biologically real, not just symbolic. When early humans sat together in an enclosed space and entered an altered state together through shared smoke, they weren't just marking an occasion. They were building the kind of bond that let them face danger side by side and trust that no one would run. Then, centuries later, one particular version of this ancient practice got stripped of its ritual, its medicine, and its meaning, and turned into something engineered for mass consumption. What had been a carefully managed practice, refined over thousands of years, became, in a matter of decades, an industrial product designed to create dependence rather than connection. So when did humans first start smoking? The honest answer is that we're still finding the edges of it. What we know for certain is this: by the time any civilization first put ink to paper, the practice was already ancient, already wrapped in ritual, medicine, and meaning that clearly took centuries to build. It predates writing. It predates agriculture. It may predate almost everything we consider the beginning of human civilization, and underneath all of it sits something researchers now describe as a genuine biological pull, the drive to seek an altered state, running quietly alongside hunger, thirst, and the need to belong. It shows up in elephants that seek out fermented fruit. It shows up in reindeer that eat psychoactive mushrooms in the wild. It is not unique to us, but we are the species that built entire systems of meaning around it. Our ancestors gave that impulse structure, ritual, restraint, purpose. And somewhere along the way, In the transition from sacred fire to factory production line, we kept the impulse and quietly let the meaning fall away.